All right, I would like to call this meeting to order. Just before I begin the meeting, I would like to introduce Paul Shipway. He's our new CAO who began on January the 5th. So we're glad to welcome Paul to Central Elgin, and he's come right in at an interesting time.
Thank you.
In the middle of COVID and all. Thank you. This is a public meeting to enable representatives of Watson and Associates to present the results of the Central Elgin Water and Wastewater Rate Review and to enable the public to ask questions about the review and the recommended rates. Does any member of council have a disclosure of interest concerning this proposal? Seeing or hearing none? What method of notice and when was the notice given to the public for this meeting?
Madam Mayor, notice was published to the News and Public Notice webpage, as well as under the Let's Talk Central Elgin Project webpage on Wednesday, December the 23rd, 2020. Notice was also published in the CE Buzz, the St. Thomas Times Journal, on Wednesday, December the 30th, and in the Elmer Express on Wednesday, January the 6th, 2021.
Thank you. And before I call on Mr. Scandlan, I'm just note that if you want to follow along after or check it out on Let's Talk Central Elgin, tonight's presentation will be fully on there. So Gary Scandlan from Watson and Associates, welcome. We have used Gary many times, and Watson and Associates are the experts in water rate studies. So I'm going to ask Gary now to make his presentation on the study.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council, pleasure to be before you. I'm just going to bring up the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see it.
Our screen's just locked.
Okay.
Whit's going to unlock us here. We hope. Control Alt Delete to unlock. Thank you. We are unlocked and we can see your presentation now, Gary.
Fantastic. Well, it's a beautiful picture of your harbor. So pleasure to be before you once again. So we've put together a presentation, which is really an extension from the presentation that we made earlier, which I think has been posted on your website. So rather than go through all of the details behind it, I'll just hit it at a higher summary level. For things such as the capital budget, the operating budget, etc. If you, through you, Madam Mayor, if any of the councillors have a question as I'm proceeding through it, I'd be happy to entertain those questions. So with the study, we obviously have gone through to talk about many different things with members of the committee. So tonight we'll talk about just an overview on the legislation. Since Walkerton, there's water and wastewater has been highly legislated, and municipalities have to go through many different reporting processes with the province and even certifications and licensing to run the systems. So I'll touch on that. And I'll start to get into the mechanics of the calculations. So we looked at not only we've extended out over a 10-year planning horizon, so we'll look at the changes in your number of customers and your volumes over that time. We'll talk about capital needs and the financing, and that would include growth related as well as replacement costs for your existing system. Talk about operating expenditures, and then we'll go through a number of different calculations with respect to the rates, and to talk about different options before council for your consideration. So really we started with the process of looking at the water rate forecast, water and wastewater rates, and considering all of your capital needs. And for the benefit of the public, when I use the word capital, what that means is replacing infrastructure, your water mains, pumping stations, treatment facilities. So the word capital in the municipal realm talks about infrastructure. So I'll talk about the construction of infrastructure and how we're going to pay for that. And then there's the day-to-day operating costs. And actually, Central Elgin has many different moving parts with respect to their operating budgets because they're hooked into different water systems, starting with the Elgin primary system, which is the main, it's the central water treatment facility, which is actually managed by London, but shared by a number of different municipalities. So they all purchase into that program. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And then through that process, we'll then talk about the rates and the options that we've talked to the committee for their consideration, and ultimately tonight or subsequent to this for council's consideration. Now, a couple of things that need to be just at a very high level that need to be considered is right now, the municipality has been running into deficits on the water side, and the deficits are in theory being funded from the reserve funds. Reserves are like, for municipalities, are like a bank account, but the bank account is basically overdrawn by almost $1.2 million. So the revenue that's coming in isn't sufficient to meet the expenditures going out, and we're basically running deficits. So that has to be addressed. We talked about with the municipality, considering the expenditures and such, revenue stability, so that depending on how you develop your rate structure, it can either be very fluctuating from year to year, the revenues you get. For example, if you're only metering and you weren't collecting what we call a base charge, which is that fixed monthly or bi-monthly charge. If you didn't have that, then the municipality would be solely at the mercy, per se, of weather fluctuations. During the summertime, obviously, if we have a very wet year, people are less likely to be watering the lawns or washing cars, etc. And in a very dry year, the consumption goes up quite significantly because people are drawing more of the water. So if you don't balance the way that you impose the water bill, you can get these very wide fluctuations in your revenue stream. Considering the municipality has a lot of very high fixed costs, we need to consider revenue stability. One of the things that was talked about is with the water and wastewater bills that go to the customers, they're being billed once every 2 months. And given the fact that the bills can be a fairly significant amount for the household when it's done every 2 months, it may be easier for individuals or households to pay it on a monthly basis. So one of the things that we've looked at is there's some extra costs, but moving towards a monthly bill. That way it's a little bit easier, such as your hydro or your bell bill, your internet bill, to pay it on a monthly basis. And then we'll talk a little bit about there's infrastructure that's going to accommodate growth. And we have to talk about that because that, as well as is pulling a negative draw on the municipality. So we've made some suggestions to resolve that. Now, as I've noted, since Walkerton, there have been significant legislative changes. And these are really the key pieces of legislation which affect directly the Central Elgin. The Safe Drinking Water Act is the significant piece of legislation which guides municipalities in everything that they do in running the water system. It talks about how much treatment of the water for disinfection that needs to be provided. There are rules with respect to testing, how often, where, how much. There's training of individuals that are working on the system, etc. So the Safe Drinking Water Act is highly legislative. We have to do reporting. We have to be licensed all through this. And in fact, the municipality has to apply to the municipality every 5 years and provide detailed information, including the information we're presenting through our reports that have to be submitted to the province in order to secure their license to run the water system. There was a piece of legislation called the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act. I'm not going to talk much about it other than it has been replaced by the Water Opportunities Act. So I'll talk about that in a minute. The Ontario regulation that's there requires this financial reporting as part of getting your license. And that's a detailed document that has to be submitted. And when we finalize this process, we'll be preparing that document for submission to the province. There's the Clean Water Act. It's not directly impacting the municipality on a day-to-day basis, but it does deal with water management at the broader level. So it's looking at water from source or from protection of different areas. So it's the Clean Water Act really is, for the most part, overseen by the conservation authorities, and they end up impacting back to the individual municipalities. Now, I talked about the Water Opportunities Act. This legislation is in progress. It replaced the Sustainable Water and Sewage Systems Act. And really what it's doing is requiring municipalities to do a very detailed review of their existing infrastructure. So the pipes that you have today in the ground, the pumping stations, the treatment facilities, and you have to develop, you have to evaluate the age, the performance of those assets, and over time provide for the replacement of those assets. Part of the problem in Walkerton was the care and the standard of maintenance for the pipes. Like the big problem there was the well being tainted. But then subsequent to that, because the assets were poorly maintained, they couldn't get the E. coli out of the system. So now municipalities are required to do very detailed analysis on their systems, and ultimately be filing a report on how the performance or the inventory of it, and then have a financial plan that's going to deal with it. And that's really, if we jump ahead to the last bullet, the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act is another piece of legislation where the province has said to all municipalities in Ontario, you have to inventory all of your assets, not only water, not only sewer, but storm and roads and parks, recreation, and develop these long-term plans. So really, when they the municipality completes its requirements under the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, it'll feed into the Water Opportunities Act. So I'll leave that there. There's more information in the prior report. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Now, our starting point is to look at 2020 rates. And you can see on the left-hand side is your water rates. On your right-hand side is the wastewater. There's two components of your water bill. There's what's called a base charge. And the base charge is basically a monthly, we've represented here on a monthly basis, a monthly amount that you're going to pay. And it doesn't matter whether you're down in, well, historically, if you were down in Florida as a snowbird and weren't consuming any water, or whether you were here consuming water as well, you still have to pay this $18.50 per month. 85% of Ontario municipalities use this type of billing system where they have a fixed amount per month. And then on top of it, we'll have a volume charge, which is represented here. So the meter reads the amount of water flowing through that meter, and then you pay on a cost per cubic meter. Once again, most municipalities use this type of system. There are customers within St. Thomas, and they're subject to a number of rates. We have these charges that St. Thomas charge through the municipality, and I just want to recognize what those charges are because we have to rationalize their fees relative to Central Elgin's charges. On the wastewater side, it's a little less complex. We have just the meter, $22 per month, and then the volume charge, $2.85. And you can see it's less complex with the city of St. Thomas. So that's our starting point, and then we're going to move forward in order to take a look at how these bills will change as we move forward into the future. Now, the one thing I will caveat is we are forecasting out 10 years. This is to identify a trend line. This is to identify, based on all the assumptions and all the work we've done with the municipality to date, this is generally where we see the rates going over time. They could be subject to minor refinements from year to year. Council will only consider 1 year's rates. The next year, they'll consider the rates again. So to some extent, there'll be an updating to see whether we need to impose these rates. Should they be slightly higher, slightly lower? But generally, the trend lines we're presenting should be relatively consistent over the time horizon. Now, we talked about, there's 3 different components to a municipality's finances, and it's not too dissimilar from what you have in a household. So I've talked about a capital, that's the infrastructure. So capital would be buying your house, capital would be purchasing a car. So these large, very large purchases. And for the water and the wastewater system, it's building new pipes or replacing pipes that are already in the ground. There's pumping stations, there's treatment facilities. There's a number of different elements to the capital budget for the municipality. There's the operating budget, which in your household is the day-to-day expenses. You know, as the bills come in, you pay your hydro, you pay your internet, you pay your gas bill, your visa. Those day-to-day expenses are similar to municipalities. They have to pay salaries, wages. They have contracts with others to engage in the day-to-day operating of the systems. They also have to pay to such as the Elgin primary system for all the water that they use. They pay them a certain amount per cubic meter. So an operating is the day-to-day. And so those are the 2 key components. Reserve funds is almost like a bank account where you're going to set aside some money. I know I want to build buy a car in 3 more years. So I'm going to take some money from my operating budget, put it over to capital, and I'll be banking it so I'll have enough money to buy the car in 3 years. So the reserve is almost like a bank account or a savings or a set aside. We talked about earlier that with respect to water, the municipality has been running deficits, and at the end of 2019, it was running an $830,000 deficit. And by the end of 2020, we estimated that it's almost 1.2 million. So the bank account is way overdrawn. So we are, as we had noted here, our expenditures are basically being larger than our revenues, and we have to correct this problem, or we're going to continue this perpetual increase in deficit. We also have to pay that deficit off, okay, because it's a major drag. Actually, the provincial legislation says you have to provide for a balanced budget, and obviously we're not balancing, so we have to deal with this problem. On the water side, our starting position, we're in relatively good shape, starting with $1.6 million to start with at the beginning of 2020. Now, I won't go through the details. That's once again provided in the prior presentation. But the capital was considered basically based on replacement. So based on performance, age, maybe how the system is interconnecting with other infrastructure that has to be constructed. There's about almost $8 million in water infrastructure that needs to be addressed over the next 10 years. And there's over $12 million on the wastewater side. So if you look at the prior presentation, we showed you a year to year, how much is going to be spent. And we've looked at the financing of that on a year-to-year basis. There's not a lot of magic to the funding that's available for municipalities. Basically, if there's grants available, And they are available from time to time. We would obviously use that money to help offset the cost of building the infrastructure. There's not really much in the way of the programs right now. However, looking into the future, we're hopeful that with the COVID situation, the province and the federal governments will provide some type of program to basically enhance municipalities' infrastructure spending, and that may translate into some offset to these expenditures. So basically, that's for the most part what we would get from the outside sources. If we can't get it from the outside, it basically all comes down to the ratepayer paying for that infrastructure. Now, there's development charges. I'll talk about that in a minute. That's for growth-related costs. So there's expanding infrastructure. New growth comes on. We need to expand infrastructure. We need to add additional pipes. We do the what's called a development charge study, and the developers actually pay a contribution every time you construct a house or a non-residential building, commercial, industrial. You make a capital payment to the municipality, and that goes towards paying for this infrastructure. So for the most part, other than perhaps cash flow, which I'll talk about, the cost related to growth pays for growth with respect to water and wastewater. So when you see here where we have development charge, we say growth related debentures. That's for development charges, but we haven't got the money in the bank, so we're going to have to go out and borrow in order to pay for that infrastructure. So for the most part, we would hope that that doesn't impact at all on the rates that we calculate. So now we're down to we either debenture, so we borrow the money, we go out to borrow from the province. So almost like getting a loan for a car or a mortgage for a house, we're going to go out and get the money and pay it back year to year to year. And or we are going to draw the money from reserves. So in the capital financing, this is just like your house. How much can we kind of save in the bank account? That's the reserves. And how much do we actually have to go out and borrow from the bank or whatever? And that's what we're balancing. And you can see on the debentures, on the debt side, we've got about 3.3 million for water and over $2.5 million from the reserves. And on the wastewater, we've got about 300,000 in total from debt and from reserves. You can see a large portion of the wastewater investment relates to growth related. We talked about infrastructure costs, and this is the looking at just the replacement of what the municipality has currently. And you can see in total to get the water into the houses, and then when you use the system and get it back out and it's treated, the municipality has invested $131 million in infrastructure to run these systems. The age of the water system dates back to the 1950s. So there's some of the infrastructure that's 70 years old. And for water mains and such, that's quite old. Depending on the type of material, the quality, how historically it's been maintained, etc., you may get somewhere between 50, 80, maybe 100 years. If the stuff's been built more recently, that would be performing at 100 years. Some of the other infrastructure isn't performing at that level. So that means that some of that infrastructure is almost at the end of its useful life, which is why we need to replace some of that infrastructure. And you can see here, we got about $4.4 million in infrastructure that's being replaced. So about almost $3 million in water mains. You can see the water meters. There's a value of the meters, and the replacement's a little higher because we're upgrading with a better quality of meters. Plus the historic costs are much less than what the replacement costs are today. So You can see on the water side, we have to spend about 4.4 million. On the wastewater side, about 1.2. And the wastewater dates back to 1970s. So it's only on average, the oldest stuff is about 50 years old. When you look at this, and what's very important to remember is that with all of this infrastructure, if you take a look at it on a per customer basis, the municipality has invested $17,000 per customer to get the water into the house and $28,000 to take that water from the house and to treat it. So in total, that's about $35 million. Now keep in mind on the water side, which is only showing at 17, there's also costs associated with the Elgin primary. There's there's 2 secondary systems, which are how the water is transmitted from the Elgin system. There's a system that goes through St. Thomas. So on top of that, there's a lot of capital costs that are included in those other rates that we have to pay to those jurisdictions. So very expensive in order to run these systems. So if you think of it, when we talk at, basically at about $35,000 per customer, if we were going to replace this over 100 years, if we had the ability, at a minimum, we'd have to be investing $350 a year from your water and wastewater bill just to maintain the replacement of those assets. If those assets are much older, and we have less time to replace them, so a more significant portion of your water and your wastewater bill will increase in order to directly start to deal with the replacements of these assets. Okay, and this is one of the key areas that the province is focusing in on. I go back to that Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act, Water Opportunities Act. This is exactly where they're focusing, is maintaining, replacing the existing assets. Now, on the operating budget, there's a lot of things that are happening there as well. Through this process, we've talked with the committee. One of the things they'd like to do is to move from a bi-monthly or a bill every 2 months to a bill every month. There's some added cost associated with metering, reading the meters, added cost associated with running extra bills, doing the mailings, etc. So there's an extra cost that we've added into the 2031 budget. And you can see that it's about $19,000, almost $20,000 for water, about $40,000 on the wastewater side to double up on the number of bills going out. There's been an additional need to address the staffing for wastewater. So there's been some adjustments to both the water and the wastewater. And associated with that, there was a minor reduction because we're adding full-time positions back into the system. So we've made some adjustments for staffing. So those, in essence, are the smaller components of the cost increases. When we take a look at the other systems, so with the water system, depending where you are, we have to pay, the main system is the Elgin primary. So that's the one that draws the water from Lake Erie, and it actually goes up to the south part of London. And there's a number of municipalities that share in that system. So that system is expected to basically run at, as it's been estimated right now, a little bit above inflation, running at about 3% for the next couple of years, and then 2.5% thereafter. But then, even though we have those main pipes, there's also a secondary pipe that comes off of it. It's called the Malahide system. There's another one for the Elmer system. And those both are running roughly at 5% per year. So we have to purchase the water out of those systems, and they're charging back at a level of 5% per year. And then if you take a look at what we purchased through the St. Thomas system, the rate of increase is being estimated at 9% for the next 3 or 4 years, and then 8.5%. And then at this point, they're figuring that they'll be able to stabilize that charge afterwards. So all of these costs are basically to the municipality. There's nothing they can do. They have to pay those bills to those systems. So that's causing above inflation an increase on the amount of expenditures going to run the systems. And if any of the other costs that are directly to the municipality, we've assumed 2% for the most part inflation for most of the costs, except for chemicals and hydro, which we've been monitoring over the last 5 to 7 years, and they've been tracking roughly at about 5% per year. So we made a provision to increase them at a slightly higher level. And then I won't go into the gory details, but the St. Thomas system, for those customers that are hooked directly into that, we get billed by St. Thomas for those customers, and they pay at these individual rates. They pay a monthly base charge, and then on top of it, they pay these volume and capital charges. So you can see that basically, the St. Thomas is running in and around 5% per year on the volume charges. They'll be stabilizing on the monthly base charge. So once again, number of different things that are pulling at the municipality for increasing their expenditures faster than inflation. Now, if we take a look just at a high level, and I'll come back to break these costs down, where this money's going. But you can see on the water budget and that we've broken it down into two components. So of the what you are paying basically in your water bill, the operating budget is about 2.3 million out of 3.6 million. And then the capital related is almost about 1.4 million. So you can see that the blue area is the day-to-day operating cost, and you can see that that's increasing faster than inflation. And then there's all this capital infrastructure that has to, like the debt charges or reserve transfers, that actually has to be recovered from the bill. And you can see the burgundy is layered on top of your day-to-day expenditures. And we've given you a similar type of estimate with respect to wastewater. Now, if I break that down, so this really would be, if you wanted to look at your water bill, where's the money going towards? You can see the largest component is at the top left-hand side, the capital side of things. So either paying for debt on infrastructure that's been recently built, but we didn't have the money, paying off that deficit, paying money into the reserve. So we've got money to address the infrastructure. It's about 37% of your bill. So it's a significant and for the most part, a fixed cost that the municipality has to pay. As we move around clockwise, you can see that administration of the service, so that's the billings, that's going out and doing a number of different contracts, the studies that have to be done, filing the reports with the province and such. That's all part of that amount, and that's about 12%. The treatment component, about 2%. A lot of the money is actually not from municipalities' treatment. It's actually purchased on the next one, purchase of water through the Elgin and the secondary systems. It's 26%. We have to do some compliance reporting to the province, to the MOE, it's 2%, and then distribution. So this is dealing with water main breaks, flushing the pipes, etc. It's about 21%. So in essence, that's where your water bill broken up into a percentage basis. Where does it go on a day-to-day basis? As I've noted, a lot of these are basically fixed. Not a lot of leeway from a day-to-day basis. We have to, especially after Walkerton, we have to maintain the system up to provincial regulations, and it's very expensive to meet those regulations. On the wastewater side, you can see that the capital component, so the debt and the reserves, is basically 52% of the wastewater bill. Administration is about 15%, treatment is about 16%, dealing with the collection system, which is basically the pipes and the pumpage, it's about 16%, and then once again, the regulatory compliance, about 1%. But once again, this is when you look at your water bill and your wastewater bill, this is where the money goes on a percentage basis to run the system. Now, we talked, the first starting point was to talk about what you currently, the structure on how you pay your bills. And so that we looked at a couple of different options at the request of the committee, so that there are ways of shifting more burden onto the base charge or more burden onto the volume. What that does is when you shift the costs onto slightly different ways of imposing the charge, it would perhaps reduce from one sector, like may reduce on the residential side and put more burden on the commercial industrial side, or vice versa. So it depends how you select your approach to doing the rates, who gets impacted as a result of those changes. So as we said, right now, we got volume rates, we got base charges, and those are imposed on all the customers. So what council or the committee wished us to do is, okay, so if we stay with the current rate structure, and keep in mind, we included extra customers that'll be coming on as a result of growth. So those extra customers that'll be coming on will pay exactly the same as all the rest of the existing customers. So we've included their volumes and their base charge contributions into these calcs. And then we've looked to do a couple of different options. So we want to vary the rates, we want to vary the base charge, and see how this is impacted. Now we focus primarily on the water side, and we'll look at the impacts of that. And as I've said, we're moving towards a monthly base charge cycle, and that should help individuals seeing a month-to-month basis rather than bi-monthly. So I'm sorry for the complexity here, but as I say, the committee wanted us to consider different scenarios for water. So what we were doing on the base scenario that we presented initially to council was we were going to freeze the volume rates. So that rate that's currently imposed would stay. And then any cost increases would be shifted over to the base monthly charge, okay? We'll freeze your volume, what you pay through the meter, but that basic flat rate, fixed amount per month, that's where the increase will occur. There was scenario number one, which says, okay, what if with every bill, we allowed 7 cubic meters of water to be consumed? So if you, the first 7 cubic meters, you're not paying any addition for, what would the impacts be? And then the volume charges wanted to be decreased over time. So if we decrease the volume charge, obviously, and we're decreasing the charge, and we're decreasing the amount that we're recovering through the volume, that puts even a higher burden on that fixed monthly charge. So scenario one really put more burden onto the fixed, less burden onto the volume charge. Scenario two, keep the volume charges at the current levels, and then try and work with the base charge to replicate to some extent the way that St. Thomas does their base charges, and try and reflect kind of the structure that they have in place, which would put more burden on the non-res guys, less burden on the res guys. And the third one, which ultimately is, I think, where we would deem the preferred based on our discussions. It hasn't been approved, but it is being, or sorry, it's where committee and council appear to be going is the volume charges are reduced so that by the time we hit the end of 10 years, we have a similar charge to St. Thomas. And then the base charge is what will take that extra burden, and we're going to generate a charge that looks in and around like St. Thomas. So on the water, we didn't do any extra calculations. The original base charge and volume charge stay as is. Now I apologize for this. This becomes very, these comparisons become a little bit more busy on the presentation. But what we've tried to do, if you take a look, oops, sorry. If you take a look at the blue lines give you what scenario we're talking about. So the top is a residential bill based on an average amount of 147 cubic meters of water being used per year. So we've looked at the average for all of the customers, all of the residential customers in Central Elgin. And on average, you consume 147 cubic meters. So we've based it on that average. And as you can see, the base charge was the first scenario that we did. And then we've gone through scenario 1, 2, and 3. And with each of those, you can see we've calculated the base charge and the volume charge to give you a full bill. And we've given you what the impacts are on those bills. And you can see that we end up with a 14% increase for 2021. And then the bills vary over the 10-year forecast. On the non-residential side, so you can see basically 14 and then 7, from 6 to 8 on the res side, and then roughly 3 to 4, and then 1 to 3. When we take a look at the non-residential side, you can see that each of these scenarios have a dramatic shift on the non-res. So we've used a medium 3-inch meter, and 500,000 cubic meters of usage. So that's kind of middle of the road customer size. You can see under each of these scenarios, the one we initially put forth had a 6% increase. Even though the res was going up by 14, it would only go up by 6 on the non-res. Or if you go down to scenario 3, it's a 14% increase on the res, but a 45% initial increase on the non-residential. And then you can see that for the most part, it's slightly higher year to year to year on this non-residential user. Now then we, for the benefit of the committee, we took 3 live samples. So we looked at the Elgin County building, and under each of these scenarios, you can see how the impact of those changes would be. So in the initial stage, there's a 5% increase. And then there's, on scenario 3 and scenario 1, it's about a 1% increase. The highest increase would be under scenario 2. Then we've got the OPP station. You can see the results there. And then we've taken a look at the St. Joe's Health Center and looked at their bill. Now they're the largest user. They've got a 6-inch meter, 2,300 cubic meters. So they would be one of the largest impacts on an individual customer. So we had presented that information to the committee. So this just demonstrates how the preferred structure actually works. The monthly base charge you can see on a month-to-month basis. So this is scenario 3. Your fixed amount would go from $18 a month to $27 a month. But then the amount that's going through your meter, how much you're paying for volume, will decrease over time. So you can see the volume rate will drop down to $1.77, but your fixed monthly charge is going to increase up to $66. On the that 3-inch meter, you can see we're going to increase them under this scenario. They're going to go from $18.50, and they're going to jump up. That base charge goes to $148, and then goes up to $362. And then they've got the base charge going down at the same rate. So you can see where the residential goes in total from $721 to $1,061. For this is the water bill. This corresponding customer goes from $1,900 up to $5,200. Okay, so a more significant impact on the non-residential. With respect to the wastewater bills, you can see similar type of thing where the base charge is going up over time. In this particular case, we held the volume flat, and you can see the total bill then for the res goes from $683 up to $970 for wastewater over the 10 years, whereas the corresponding non-residential goes from about almost $1,700 up to almost $2,000. And then we have presented just the combined bills. So if we look at combining the water and the wastewater, the total bill goes from, in 2020, it was $1,400. It's going up to going up to $1,600, and then slowly rising to $2,000 by the end of the 10-year period. That other customer we talked about would be going from $3,600 up to $7,200. So you can see the increases are less on the residential side, more significant on the the commercial industrial side. And then for those individual customers we talked about, we did the calculations, the water and wastewater. You can see actually the OPP rises up, and then towards the back end of the forecast, it drops down a bit. The Elgin County facility goes from about 1,600, generally follows a similar type of thing. It rises up, and then it comes back down at the end of the forecast. And then the St. Joe's goes from about 15,000 up to 26,000. So as I say, depending on how we move the burden from the base charge to the, or off of, so let's say the volume charge onto the base charge, it'll have a different impact on different users. And one of the things we talked about was there's a significant deficit for, right now, we're up to almost $1.2 million. What we've shown here as part of this plan is to stop that negative, so drawing more money than what we're receiving. And starting to reverse that pattern. So you can see that we'll have the deficit paid off roughly by 2024. So just factors that we talked about resulting in what we provided. Obviously, the water deficit is something we've had to deal with. So we have dealt with that. Over the last couple of years, there have been added payments that have been needed to be made to St. Thomas. The last payment is 2021, after which we should be in reasonable shape. That's both on the water and the wastewater side. Obviously, the second last bullet talks about the capital program, which we went through in a fair amount of detail. There's a significant amount of replacement costs that the municipality has to deal with. And then obviously, there's those inflationary increases from the different water systems and generally from the operating budgets that have to be built into these calculations. Now, one of the things we pointed out, and we've ensured that there's no impact directly onto the rates that we presented you, but we've looked at on the growth side, the amount of infrastructure that has to be built and the timing of it is the municipalities either going to have to issue significant debt or will be running deficits in the development charge reserve. So our suggestion, our recommendation is to, for the municipality, work with the developers to accelerate the timing of their payments for development charges so that we enhance your cash flow and offset the need to basically debenture or go into those negative reserve fund balances. With that, there have been some observed changes in development charge costs on a couple of the projects, so we should probably amend the DC to reflect that. And if we can't get payments from the developers, then we might have to look to delay projects in order to basically balance the cash flow. So those are things that we've mentioned to the committee. A recommendation with the growth-related costs, as we've talked about on the non-growth. So this is the replacement infrastructure. There is about $4 million in debt that we're going to have to issue. The municipality may want to consider ways of dealing with that debt, either because the sizable amount of debt's been issued over the last few years. So you may want to consider either delaying projects, or even if the opportunity arises to increase the reserve fund transfers in some manner. And the preferred rate, as we've talked about, and I'm reaching towards the end here, the rate structures, depending on how you structure them, they can shift from one side to the other. When you can put more reliance on the volume rate, it shifts more generally onto the non-residential. When you impose it on, you put it more on the base charge, generally there's a bit more of a burden on the res. The varying the base charge by meter size does help to compensate for that shift by putting an increased dollar amount. Right now, you charge the same monthly charge depending on, and it doesn't matter how big the meters are. The one that we've recommended actually puts a larger burden on the bigger meters. That would help to offset some of those shifts. And basically with the higher base charge, moving to more base charge versus volume rate will give us that rate stability that we talked about. As I say, there's a huge amount of fixed costs within the municipality's budgets, and you need to ensure that you've got rate stability to pay for all of those bills. Just to finish off, excuse me. This is looking at the bills for other municipalities. This actually says as of January 4th, but actually it's for the most part, most of the other municipalities are their 2020 water and wastewater rates. So what we're presenting here is the charge for Central Elgin, kind of in the yellow. So in the 2020 was at roughly about $1,405 combined, and it would be moving up to the $1,600 range. Now that moves you from, I guess, fifth position up to third. Once again, we don't know what the other increases are going to be for the other municipalities. They'll be going through their budget process, so we have to see where they end up. But you can see that it's at the higher end. Basically, you're in the midpoint and you're rising up. We would expect to see other places. Bayham, they're subject to those water systems, so we may see a higher increase with them and some of the other municipalities. So anyway, that's just a comparison, put where you are currently and to see where you would be with the adoption of these rates. And then once council finalizes this process, then implementing the rate structures and such, then we can look to monitor these expenditures. I've noted that there are perhaps some grant programs that might be announced as a result of COVID. We will monitor this if there's obviously some projects that are coming forth for 2022, 2023, and we can reduce the cost with grants. That would give rise to obviously adjusting these rates potentially downwards to reflect that lower cost investment, but that'll have to be monitored. So through you, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to return the presentation to you, and I seek your guidance on any questions that may arise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scandlan. Have you received any written submissions on the proposed changes, Mrs. Wilson?
Madam Mayor, written email submissions have been received from Nigel Howcroft and Dan Ross, which were forwarded to staff and to the consultant.
Thank you. Prior to opening up the floor for questions, I would ask that participants abide by the following. Please be respectful of all participants. This includes consultants, council, and staff. If you cannot be respectful, then you may be removed from the meeting. In the interest of time, please refrain from an excessive preamble or statement. We're here to answer your questions, so keep your question to no more than 1 minute in length. Once you've asked your question, you will be placed back in the waiting room so that others may have the opportunity to ask a question. You will go to the back of the queue and you can ask another question when others have had their opportunity to ask their question. If a question has been asked before, please refrain from asking it again. If a question has already been asked, then we will move on to the next participant. We will now move to opening the meeting. If you're listening on a computer, tablet, or smartphone, please click the raise hand icon. If you've called into the meeting using a telephone, please dial *9. The questions will be taken in sequential order. When given the opportunity to speak, please provide your name and address for the record. I am now opening the meeting. Mr. Perrin has the control of and will let me know who is the first speaker, etc., according to the order. Mr. Perrin?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I see no questions from anyone in the, sorry, there's one there now. Go ahead, Mr. Delibic.
Hi, Your Worship and members of council. My question relates to growth paying for growth. I noticed that the list of water and wastewater capital system needs for the wastewater system totals about $10.5 million. However, in the growth related debenture requirements, notice that's only $9.3 million. So I was wondering if that difference is being funded by the existing ratepayers or by the community.
Mr. Perrin, can you answer that?
I'll defer to Mr. Scandlan, then
Sorry.
if need be, then I can hop in.
Thank you. Mr. Scandlan.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, when we look at some of the growth-related infrastructure, perhaps it may not be 100% recoverable from development. When we do over half of the development in Ontario, there's very extensive legislation surrounding it. One of the concepts is to look at projects and see if there's something that benefits the existing ratepayer or taxpayer in those projects. So, for example, if we do some type of improvement and it's relieving problems with poor water pressure, we may allocate a small amount of that project costs to recognize that it's benefiting the existing residents. So when we go through very detailed discussions with staff, such as Mr. Perrin, in order to understand the nature of those works and to observe whether there's a deduction that we should be made. So the recognition here is that there was a small within, and I haven't got the details right in front of me, but within one of the projects that's being recommended, there was a small deduction to recognize some benefit that was being provided by that particular infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Liebeck. Mr. Perrin, do we have another person waiting to ask a question?
Seeing none currently. Okay. Wendy, go ahead.
You're muted, Wendy. Please state your name and address. I forgot to ask Mr. Liebeck to do that.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wendy McMillan, and I live at 467 Valley Street in Port Stanley. When I moved here 6 years ago from Kitchener-Waterloo, I noticed immediately that water seemed more expensive here than I had been used to. And I don't think my usage changed. And I heard you talk about the impact of Walkerden, but I would think that would be province-wide. Are there other factors within Central Elgin where it was necessary to spend more money on infrastructure than in other parts of the province? And is that part of the reason for the change in expense? And also, is population a factor? Like, there are more people living in Kitchener-Waterloo to spread the cost over versus within Central Elgin.
That
It
is
would just
correct,
help to
Wendy.
understand.
Yes, Wendy, I know I will refer to Gary here in a moment, but that is something we've discussed too, because we live in a far less dense populated area that has water. So it's fewer customers to pay for much larger amount of infrastructure, which makes it rather difficult because we have lots of large lots, which people enjoy. But it does mean that there's greater costs. So I'll ask Mr. Scandlan if there are other things he'd like to add.
Yes, it's a very good question. And through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, number one, density obviously has a factor to play. Obviously, when you have a water main in the city of Waterloo and the lot sizes perhaps are 30 or 40 feet, then you're getting on two sides of the street, every 40 feet, you're getting 2 units sharing that pipe. In Central Elgin, obviously the lots are bigger, and even the distance between each of the individual communities is a lot greater. And so that's number one. Number two, what I call the big pipe system, which is your Elgin primary, these are very expensive systems. I had done on behalf of the Ontario Municipal Water Association, going back a number of years ago, an analysis on what provides the lowest cost of water, and we analyzed many different types of systems. And what I call the big pipe systems are the most expensive from a capital cost and an operating cost, because when you're going to build a big pipe, you're going to oversize it to allow growth for maybe 20 years. So instead of a pipe this big, you're building a pipe this big. So you have to fund that. The cost of pushing the water from the lake and pushing it all the way uphill, it ultimately goes to London, but then there's all these offshoot mains. The big pipe systems are the most expensive systems. So in Waterloo, you're pulling a lot of groundwater, so that groundwater tends to be the cheapest water. Lake water tends to be more expensive, and then big pipe systems are the most expensive, and they're pulling from the lakes. So at least from a water perspective, it's the most expensive system, but obviously it benefits the most people. It was a system that was built back in the I think late 1970s, early 1980s. And then other than that, it just depends on where municipalities are in the age of their infrastructure. If the infrastructure is very old and it's not performing very well, it's at the front part of your capital program. If it's a newer system, a lot of municipalities had their systems built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s under provincial programs. So some of the works in Waterloo region have very young systems as compared to some of the systems here that date back to 1950. So all these different factors, Madam Mayor, impact on basically at the end of the day, the rates that people pay for.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Wendy. Mr. Perrin?
Go ahead, Mr. Farrell.
Hi there, it's Amy Farrell, Barron's Court in Belmont. I'm just looking for a little bit more explanation as to incurring the increased administrative costs of switching to a monthly billing system when no realized benefit would be passed on to the ratepayers.
Mr. Scanlon? Mr. Scanlon, do you want to respond to why we think we're going to billing or monthly billing, or would Mr. Brooks or Mr. Perrin or Mr. Shipway want to answer that one?
Well, I'll start, but I think the detailed analysis was undertaken by staff. But I think if I look across Ontario, there are some do billings on a quarterly basis, some every 2 months, and some monthly. I'd probably say that the monthly bills are the most often seen because they kind of replicate, your water bill, your bell bill, your hydro bill, that type of thing. So part of the discussion that we had through this process was to consider moving to a monthly from the bi-monthly. And I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to perhaps staff.
Mr. Perrin, do you wish to respond?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if council has elected or directed that we go to monthly billing, as staff presented, that will increase the administration cost because we were going from 6 bills to 12 bills a year. However, if that's what council is directed, then we're happy to carry that out. I believe the intent to go to monthly billing was to assist in residents to be able to maybe more readily budget their monthly expenses because of the bi-monthly bill. It is a larger bill. It's only coming once every 2 months, but by going to a monthly bill, that will reduce that monthly bill for water and wastewater charges.
Anyone else have a comment? Any of council wish to say anything? Mr. Brooks, you wish to speak?
Maybe if I can just add on to what Mr. Perrin said, it also provides the municipality increased cash flow, provides a resident more up-to-date information, as well as to be able to keep on top of what their water bills are more readily, as they'll be getting the information out to them monthly rather than bi-monthly. This helps in the summertime, particularly during the dry season when people are watering grass. It also could provide benefits to those residents who may have a leaking toilet. And rather than allow that toilet to run for 2 months, it's a month before. It increases or decreases the amount of time that leak is there to occur.
Thank you. Mr. Perrin, is there someone else?
I believe Councillor Fair had his hand up.
Councillor Fair?
I just wanted, in regards to the monthly billing, I did get quite a bit of feedback, people in error saying that their bills had doubled. And I talked to a few people and they were quite concerned about the bi-monthly billing, which is a large amount. And I thought monthly also would be more manageable.
Thank you. Mr. Fair represents Ward 4, and they used to receive a monthly bill when they were billed by St. Thomas directly, and then we paid through St. Thomas, we paid that. Now we bill directly, so they get a bi-monthly, and a lot of them were surprised and didn't realize it went from a 2 month, 1 month, one bill a month to a 2 month, one bill every 2 months.
Go ahead, Adam.
Hi, thank you. Adam Connolly from 42078 McBain. Thank you, Council, for presenting some various scenarios on the water bills. I am curious, why wasn't any scenarios considered where a percentage of the increase and fixed costs are paid for using funds from the tax base so that the amounts are spread evenly across a larger number of residents? I understand water users obviously should pay the majority for their use, but some of the costs are municipal assets, and administrative costs that seem to align more with the tax base. Thank you.
Gary, are you willing to talk about that one? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think if you look across Ontario, the primary basis is to charge all of the water and all of the wastewater charges through the individual rates. If you, so that you may be paying a water bill, if you put it onto property taxes, then everybody would be contributing towards that. Just as an aside, I live in the country. I have my own septic system, my own water system. People perceive it as free, but actually it's very expensive as well. From an investment, of I've got about $50,000 invested in my septic and my well system, so it's not cheap. So no matter how you look to do it. So moving towards putting on property taxes would mean individuals such as myself living out in the rural, I have to recover all my own costs and then provide a contribution towards those other systems. So that is the primary basis that most municipalities, there are some that may do a chargeback. You can do area rating through property taxes, but it has the same end. And as well, if you ever take the opportunity to read through the Judge O'Connor's recommendation and where the province is going with much of its legislation, it's moving us towards full cost recovery, which is basically having the individuals that receive the service pay for the service. So that's at the provincial level and through the Walkerton process, one of the directions that was set out.
Mr. Perrin?
Just to address the concern about administrative costs, the municipality since 1998 has been very conscious of the fact that we have both residents or properties that are on private services that don't take advantage of the municipal services, and others that are on the municipal services. And we've been very conscious of the fact that we do not cross subsidize. So whatever administrative costs or municipal oversight costs that are applicable to the water system go only to the water system. And so, for example, there are certain staff that work in both, we'll say, water and wastewater, as well as doing tax supported duties, whether it be in public works or engineering. Their time gets charged to the tax base when they do the tax supported work, and only their time gets charged to the water and wastewater service delivery when they're doing water and wastewater work. So there is also some budgetary recovering of funds through taxation. So for example, fire protection, the tax supported budget contributes money towards the water system for fire hydrant maintenance and repairs and replacement, because that's a service that for the hydrants that everyone can utilize, including those that are not serviced by municipal water, because we have hydrants out in the rural area where fire department accesses for water to fight a fire for those properties that are not serviced by water. So we're very cognizant that we're not cross subsidizing, or the water and wastewater system is subsidizing tax supported operations.
Thank you, Mr. Perrin. Councillor Kravitz.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that going to the monthly billing, we also have email billing in place. We roughly have 1,000 people that are doing the email billing already, just to save administrative costs. So email billing is something that, that helps save the cost. It saves the paper trail. So I'd just like to encourage people to sign up for the email billing for the water and wastewater bills. That's all. I just wanted to mention that with the administrative costs. Thank you.
Thank you. That would reduce administrative costs for sure. Do we, next question?
Right. Go ahead, Mr. Carey.
Yeah, Doug Carey, Lyndhurst, 10 Bathroom Street to be exact. moved to the area. I guess you don't want to hear the rambling, but the cost of water here is 5 times more than it is in the city of St. Thomas, from experience. And that's the entire bill. I know you throw out anyway. My question is, for residents that are on the water, do we have the opportunity? I can drill a well and put in the wastewater and have it paid off in 5 years. Do we have the opportunity to do that, or do we have to remain on your system?
Gary will answer. Gary?
Once you are, the legislation, the Safe Drinking Water Act provides that once you're on the system, you basically have to remain on the system. You're not allowed to drill your own well and remove yourself. There was, when the province was putting in all these legislative changes, there was one community, a small community with perhaps, let's say, 100, 150 users. And the council encouraged everybody to dig their own wells and do all this stuff, and basically fractured the system. They then put in legislation to stop municipalities or any individual from removing themselves from the system. So once you are hooked up, you have to stay hooked up to the system.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Wendy.
You're muted. Thank you.
On the issue of monthly billing, I understand that for people on a low fixed income, it's problematic to get a very big bill every 2 months. But rather than spending extra money that then gets passed on and doesn't really reduce our bills, it just spreads the payment. Could we not either do an equal billing plan, which is what I have with my gas fire supplier, or could we allow people to pay their bill over 2 months and say you can pay 50% this month and 50% the next month? There might be other creative ways that help people to manage the payment of the bill rather than the expense itself. And I do notice the penalty rate on the bills is really quite high as a percentage. If you're a day late, certainly on my bill, it's $10 to $12 extra just to be a day late. And those percentage rates seem higher. So I'm just wondering if there's more creative ways of approaching that issue.
Mr. Scandlan?
That is actually a question for staff because it's administrative. I'm not familiar enough with the capabilities of your billing system. Obviously, a bill can be sent out. If you're going to do something where you get to pay it in percentages, then there's got to be tracking, and I don't know the abilities of your system, whether it can handle that type of thing or not. So it's through you, Madam Mayor, it's really not a question for me to answer directly.
Mr. Perrin or Mr. Brooks?
Madam Mayor, we do offer now pre-authorized payments. So if a landowner does wish to sign up for pre-authorized payments, I believe we can accommodate that.
So in other words, they could divide it up into 12 payments and at the end of the year, they would just pay if they were behind, or do you mean they pay what they're billed pre-authorized?
They would pay what they're billed. We would have to investigate whether or not we have the capability of doing the equal payment plan.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, further to what Mr. Perrin said, we do have a number of individuals on a pre-authorized payment plan based on an estimated cost based on previous year's billings, and those pre-authorized payments are reconciled at the end of the year. So in December, we reconcile what's left over.
Thank you. Mr. Perrin, do we have another? Okay.
Go ahead, Rick.
I'm unmuted, I believe, am I?
Yes, you are now, Rick.
Okay. Madam Mayor and councillors, thank you so much for taking my call. It's Rick Waite, 20 Ensley Place. If I understand correctly, looking at the information, you're proposing a 13% increase in the water bill this year, and then 6% and 4% the following years. Is that correct?
I thought it was a 14, but
Okay.
it definitely is going down. Yeah, it's a high increase the first year and then going down.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, water isn't a luxury. Water is a necessity. And my concern is for people, and I'll put myself in that same boat, on fixed incomes. I know my pension check has not risen 14% or isn't going to rise 14% next year. So has there been any discussion in terms of seniors that are on fixed income as to how this is going to affect them?
Who would like to respond to that, please? Mr. Scandlan, and then I will call on you, Councillor Kravitz, after Mr. Scandlan responds.
What we provided is for a calculation so that all water and sewer customers basically absorb the same level of increase. If we were to engage in some type of system to charge somebody different, you'd have to get into an administrative process in order to set a policy. What's deemed as, is it somebody on low income? Is it somebody of a certain age? It is like, you'd have to figure out the parameters. You'd have to figure out how to have that individual present the appropriate documentation. That would have to be verified every year. And then if you, let's say 10% of the people met that criteria, and we were going to recover that within the rates, it may be that 10% of the users would be reduced, but I'd have to take the loss of the revenue and then put it on to the others. So it's at the end of the day, the bill, the amount the municipality pays for in its budgets, we have to raise the revenue. And if you reduce it from one, you have to increase it on others. So that's in theory, it's potentially achievable, but you'd have to figure out what your programs are. Is it age? Is it just because you're on pension? Doesn't necessarily, and I'm not talking about Mr. Waite's situation. It's just that some people are on pension, but the pension could be from, you were the former CEO of, an auto company versus somebody who was on a pension from another situation. So I'm not quite sure. You would have to set the parameters. You'd have to assess what is reasonable and who you would want to target. And then we could undertake a calculation, but it would mean these individuals will be reduced. The cost would then be spread across the others that are paying.
Mr. Kravitz, you wish to speak, Councillor Kravitz?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that this council we decided to freeze the rates. So there was actually a 0% increase last year in the water rates. That should be noted. That 14% increase was a process of a 2-year increase being done in 1 year. That should be noted for one thing. And with the outcry that we had about our water rates, we redid this study that is only a few years old right now. We've re-examined it, and there was a few other issues that came up. Financing, there was other issues that came up where we had to readjust rates. And unfortunately, that to have a safe water system, which we do have a safe water system, the 14% is a combination of not raising it last year, which I believe was a mistake that this council did make. We should have kept to the program of the regular rate. So I just wanted to state that, just so this 14% doesn't look like it's a 1-year increase. It's actually a 2-year increase. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kravitz.
Go ahead, Mr. Delibek.
And would you state your address, et cetera, Mr. Delibek? I forgot to ask you the first time.
Yes, absolutely, Madam Mayor. Kevin Delibek, resident at 153 Plymouth Court in Belmont. I was again curious for the water capital system needs and as well as the wastewater capital system needs. Why the majority of projects happen to be located in Port Stanley versus the rest of Central Elgin? It seems like it's a bit of an unbalanced use of funds. Surely not every water main in 1950 was installed just in Port Stanley. And I was wondering if the $1.8 million new water meter that are planned in the next little while, if they happen to be more accurate in order to reduce our water loss in the system, and if those savings were accounted for perhaps within it, or the estimated savings from that. And my last question is, why are we being so aggressive in trying to reduce the deficit of that $1.2 million? Would council be considering the implementation of a longer rate structure rather than annual basis, perhaps 2 years or 4 years, to provide some stability so the increases that are proposed could be over a longer period of time, which may help address Councillor Crivet's comment earlier. Thank you.
Mr. Perrin, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, so I'll respond to the first question with respect to the capital investment that's been made in the system. I don't believe anyone tonight has said that all the investment is being done in Port Stanley. There's been considerable investment in Belmont. It was early on in the process. So when I say process, I say over the last 15 years, some of which the debt is still in place that we're paying for. So in Belmont, there's been large capital investment in the Belmont water supply, the pump house, that the municipality at that time took out debt that's still being paid for. There's a new water tower in Belmont. We call it new. Mr. Delibek, you live on Plymouth Court. It's a relatively new subdivision or development. That water tower was constructed in early 2000, 2004, 2005, I believe. So we're still paying on debt on that, as well as a number of main replacements that have been completed. So there are a number of projects that were completed that the municipality incurred debt for that has to be funded through the water rate. That debt doesn't go away. It's the investment's been made, and we're still paying for that investment.
I did see Mr. Liebeck sent out a chat one, and I know we started with Belmont because the system was older, I believe, too. At least it was more desperate than the Port Stanley one to start with. And there have been times when the odd main has broken down, and we've had to respond very quickly. We have no choice with some of that. But certainly we've had water bills throughout the municipality, water improvements. Mr. Perrin, and then Deputy Mayor Marks.
So the second question was with respect to the water meter project and replacing those meters. The installation or replacement of old water meters has nothing to do with water loss. Water loss comes from a poor physical system, whereby you have leaks within the system that is treated water that's escaping the system that is paid for to either purchase the water or treat it. It's detrimental because the municipalities or any municipality is expending funds to either purchase or treat that water, and you have no revenue coming back in. Replacement of water meters is the water meter is in effect the scanning tool at the grocery store cash register, we'll say. So it registers the amount of water being used, And if those over time, especially mechanical meters, which we have in the municipality, some of which in Belmont are quite old. They still register in gallons, and the metric system came into place in the late 70s. So we know how old those are. So in effect, they're not effectively recording the amount of water that people are utilizing. So that is the reason for the replacement of the water meters that staff are bringing forward to council, so that we can more accurately capture the amount of water that residents use. And as well, the meters that are being proposed require less maintenance and have a longer life cycle without the need for any calibration, because they're a magnetic meter. As well as we would then be able to do a couple of things, read those meters remotely. And as the system gets improved with a wide area network, people would actually be able to log into a portal and see how much water they're using on a day-to-day basis, so they can better manage their own water consumption, or understand that if they're 1 month they had an unusually high bill, when that consumption may have occurred.
Deputy Mayor Marks, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Martin. I've had a couple of texts during the meeting. Apparently, we have a number of people watching live on Facebook, and apparently there's a lot of questions there, and I've been asked to bring it to your attention. Hopefully they can get a chance to get answers. I'm just a messenger here.
And the question? No?
They're on Facebook Live. I'm not watching it, so I don't know.
Okay.
But they would like at some point to get in, to be noted and get answers. That was the request I'm getting.
All right. I don't know.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the notice was put out for the process to be done through Zoom webinar, so that the deputy clerk can accurately note the person's name and address making comment, and that it would be done via Zoom webinar. So we don't have access to Facebook Live at this point in time. So it would be important to go to the Let's Talk Central Algon page, join the Zoom webinar, and Mr. Perrin can put people in as they raise their hand to put forward their public comment.
Correct. Deputy Mayor Marks?
And I'm only noting that I've had comment that it's difficult to get in. I don't know. I'm just passing that on. Observations.
Thank you. I think Mr. Liebeck's last question was to do with spreading the debt payment over a longer period, the repayment of the water debt. Maybe Mr. Scandlan, would you like to respond to that?
I think perhaps it was with respect to paying off the reserve deficit, if I understood.
Yes.
And we're stopping I guess right now, the first payment is to slow down and reverse the deficit, and then to pay it off. We could spread it out over a longer period of time, but keep in mind that that money is being, in essence, cash flowed or borrowed from property taxes. So you've got to look at not just the water system, you got to look at your whole financial situation and see how that's affecting your overall. Like if your reserve is negative and you haven't gone out and borrowed, and it's basically you're borrowing from the tax supported side. We could readjust the calculations, bring down the percentage a little bit on the front end. It'll raise it up later. So it's reduce it now and lever it up over the next couple of years. We're at your pleasure, how you would assess your financial situation, and feedback to us. We'd be happy to consider that.
Go ahead, Mr. Shipway, please.
Madam Mayor, just going back to the public comment aspect as well, I just want to add that there'll also be an opportunity to continue to submit written comment following the meeting up until January 27th at 4 p.m. so that anyone who wasn't able to join the meeting this evening for whatever reason is more than welcome to submit that written comment as well.
Yes, and I did see there was someone on the chat line, Mr. Perrin, who said that the Zoom automatic didn't connect and that no password was given. So I don't know if that's
Madam
a
Mayor, I've logged in twice since the meeting's been on my phone, had no issues on the link.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it's an issue with their own device, but I can tell you I've logged in on two separate occasions utilizing my phone on the link that was provided.
Mr. Kravitz, sorry, Councillor Kravitz.
Yes, I was just wondering if Mr. Shepway could give an explanation of Infrastructure Ontario, the financing for these projects and how that is handled through the government.
Certainly, through you, Madam Mayor. So the municipality actually has 12 tranches of debt for various water, wastewater projects ranging from 2005 to 2017. And those projects range in term from 10 years to 25 years. At this exact time, the maximum term that Infrastructure Ontario offers is 30 years. So even at the time of issuance of some of those loans in 2005, the max term could have been 25 years. So that speaks to term length. And Infrastructure Ontario doesn't function exactly like a bank. Infrastructure Ontario functions to provide municipalities a stable budget number for the entire term of the loan. So they go out and have access to capital market once a project is identified, and then the municipality is guaranteed a set payment over the entire life of that loan. So for the entire 25 years, the municipality is guaranteed a stable payment for budgeting purposes. It's not like a bank issued loan where you could pay it off early or have to renew at intervals throughout that period. Infrastructure Ontario doesn't offer that. And if the municipality attempted to, the municipality would have to pay out full principal and interest plus a penalty or early payment fee. And then the municipality would not have access to Infrastructure Ontario rates to refinance that, because Infrastructure Ontario doesn't finance debt. They only finance capital projects.
And Infrastructure Ontario has a lower interest rate than most institutions. I think we got a 0.6% on the one that we had to borrow this year for fire station. Mr. Perrin, is there anyone else waiting to ask a question?
Go ahead, Mr. Carey.
I'm going to move away a little bit from the logical and move towards the emotional part of this. We are in an unprecedented time in all of our lives. We have never seen anything like this before. So why has council decided to, start making these changes? We've got 14% higher water bills, garbage that's not on our taxes anymore. Why are we doing it at this time? And what are you doing to support those people that are not working, which will be a large part of our population at this time? Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Shipway, if you would respond.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as Mr. Scandlan outlined at the beginning of the process, there's typically a 5-year review on this because of deficiencies in the funding model. The municipality brought back Watsons, who are classified as qualified professionals under the Safe Water Drinking Act, to come up with a financial plan that funded the wastewater system to address the deficit within the system.
That's ridiculous.
Mr. Councillor Fair.
I just wanted to comment on that also. It sort of follows along Councillor Kravitz. Last year, in 2020, I'm talking about, we were supposed to have a rate increase. We chose to waive that rate increase because of COVID. No one knew that COVID would go on for years, the way it seems now. But by freezing our rate at the 2019 rate in 2020, we did address the COVID issue. And at this point, you just can't afford to keep on waiving and creating more deficit. But the bulk of that deficit is because we chose to stop in 2020 because of COVID and not increase rates. And in hindsight, maybe we should have kept it stable and gone on. But now we have really no choice but to catch up on what we showed a lot of heart in 2020 to waive. And possibly it was not a great financial decision.
Also, I would note that the new garbage system is actually costing you less per household. It was costing you $151 per household in your taxes. That is coming out of taxes, and you'll be paying less than that for the new system.
Madam Mayor, I have someone identified as home office.
Hi, I'm Mary Schmaltz from 128 Oldfield Lane, and we moved here last August, and I heard comments regarding the consumption, and I really don't think it's a consumption issue as it is a rate issue. Our rate where we came from, which was in the Kitchener-Waterloo, Breslau area, was 170 per mil. I think we're at 340 here. So literally our water levels have doubled, and consumption has either remained the same or, to be honest, has lowered because we aren't working and commuting. So things have changed there. I guess my question was to clarify, are the residential ratepayers paying the same as the commercial tenants or places like golf courses and the hospitals and any other, like maybe Central Elgin itself as a facility?
Mr. Scandlan?
The volume rate is exactly the same. So if you, through your meter, consume a gallon or a cubic meter of water, you're paying the exact same. With the base charge, what we were doing was we were shifting a higher charge on the larger users, such as a golf course or some of the other users. And so that added amount is actually much more than the residents.
So is it fair to say then that Port Stanley was maybe ill-prepared for the growth explosion that they've seen? Because we, as prospective purchaser, were not aware of what happened or what was happening with the rate. So it was quite a shock. We were leaving a community and giving up condo fees to come and own our own home, thinking that it would be, better ahead. But it turned out that it wasn't because of the increase in water. Like we're literally paying twice as much as what we did.
That question was asked earlier too, in that it's because of the density of our population, et cetera. It's not to do with growth. Growth has, the development charges are paying for that growth. You're just paying the water rates the same as everyone else in Central Elgin is paying. And it's just because of the density and the other things that Mr. Scandlan did explain. Mr. Perrin, you wish to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be, maybe we haven't done a very good job clarifying, but the capital investment that's been made in the system has been replacing existing pipes that and pumping stations, for example, and water treatment plants. So things that were aging that had no investment in for over 40 or 50 years. And they had reached the end of their life cycle. So if there was no development in Central Elgin since 2020, we would still be in a position where we'd still had to replace those pipes. They're aged, they're failing. Cast iron mains that gave water quality issues, whereby we had rusty water coming out of people's taps. That's what the picture that we had in 1998 when Central Elgin was created by amalgamation. There was no investment by either Port Stanley or Belmont or Yarmouth Township in and around the city of St. Thomas in replacing their infrastructure. And and council of the day made the conscious decision to make that investment and to replace those mains so that we did have a reliable system and that we were able to provide clean, safe drinking water. And that's been done. And in order to do that, there was no money in the bank at that point in time. So councils of the day made the conscious decision to incur debt and take out long-term debentures to be able to finance that replacement of the infrastructure, and we're still paying for that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Five-Ash.
Doug Five-Ash from 278 Francis Street, Port Stanley. I'm a lifetime resident of Port Stanley. I've seen the new sewers go in the 70s. Were the water mains replaced at that time? I know they are old, I know they're failing, and I know we needed to update them, and I know we spent the money, but what future projects or how much more investment do we need to make to get our system up to par? And if all this investment has been made over the last 20 years and most of the system is up, why do we keep seeing double-digit increases?
Mr. Perrin, do you want to respond to that, or Mr. Scandlan? Mr. Perrin, you're familiar with what's been replaced.
Sure. Yeah, there has been considerable investment in the water distribution system. However, there's still pipes that are aging that need to be replaced. We will definitely look at deferring as long as we can, but there's still an obligation to ensure that we have a reliable drinking water system that when people turn on the tap, that they can be assured that water is going to come out of it. And secondly, that the water is actually safe to drink, because we as a municipality and municipal officials since Walkerton all have personal liability to ensure that we do provide that safe drinking water to our customers. So there's still investment that needs to be made. For example, the wastewater system, the collection system, that was all installed in Port Stanley and Belmont. Those pipes were installed by the province of Ontario under the Ontario Water Resources Commission and funded by the province for the majority. So all those pipes were installed predominantly within about 5 or 6 years. In the 70s, that's a big lump of investment that's going to come at the municipality, in the future to replace and repair those. So while investment has been made, we're talking about a system that has an extensive life expectancy, 75 years. Maximum on some of the pipe materials that are in the ground now. The material that we're putting in the ground now is PVC. It tends to have a longer life expectancy. So the investment that's been made over the last 20 years is good for the next, we'll say 80 years.
And one thing Mr. Five-Ash asked was whether the water mains were replaced when the sewage mains went in. And the water mains were in the 50s, correct, in Port Stanley? And then the sewage things went in the 70s. And with the province doing it, I doubt that they touched the water main system.
That's my understanding. Port Stanley, for example, had their own water treatment plant down on Edith Cavell Boulevard and supplied water not only to Port Stanley, but out west to Fingal, to the former Air Force base out there. So that system was demolished and back in '96, I believe, and connection to the Elgin primary system at that point.
You also mentioned some meters being on imperial measurement. I know the meters in Port Stanley were installed in the 90s when we went to metered water. What meters are left that are in imperial?
Mr. Perrin?
There's meters in Belmont that are still Imperial, and you're correct. Port Stanley actually went to a metered system when they connected to the Elgin primary system. Before that, it was flat rate, and that system tended to not be the most responsive for revenue collection. Seasonal residents would walk out of the cottage door on Thanksgiving, leave the tap running so pipes didn't freeze, and the municipality, former village of Port Stanley, was treating that water, clean water, for the entire 4, 5, 6 months that they were gone. So regardless, even in '96, those meters are now 24 years old, so they're getting to the end of their useful life as well. So they are due for replacement because the accuracy is gone on them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frybash. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about the pipes in the ground for water, but did we not also spend quite a bit of money on the water treatment plant on Dexter? And is that influencing the water rates as well as a capital investment?
We did not spend any money on the water treatment plant on Dexter Line. That is not owned by us. We just purchase water from them. I don't know, Mr. Barron, if you want to say any more than that.
No, that's correct. So there has been a significant capital investment in that water treatment plant that was undertaken by the City of London on behalf of all the participating municipalities. I believe there was debt incurred by the City of London in order to do that, and the City of London recovers back that cost for the debt through the water rates that they charge to the municipalities. And Mr. Scandlan identified in his presentation what those increases annually are for the cost to purchase water from the Elgin primary system. So that assistant, the City of London, on behalf of the Elgin Primary Water Board, to recover those expenditures and that debt repayment.
So it does have an impact, but in a more indirect way, by London passing on their investment in the cost of water.
Yeah, that's correct. So the actual facility, the treatment facility, is managed by a board of representatives, of which Councillor Kravitz is a member, and that. But the administrative municipality that's responsible for the oversight and contracting of service and ensuring that the capital investment is made is actually the City of London. They actually manage the system on behalf of the area municipalities.
And was that upgrading related to water quality, or was it also related to upcoming development? And if it was, does that get passed on to developers?
There's been a number of capital projects at that facility. The largest one, two large ones, was the actual treatment facility that treats the sediments that come from the lake from the filtration process. Prior to that facility being constructed, water was brought in from the lake, gone through a filter bed, and then all those sediments were directly pumped back into Lake Erie. The Ministry of Environment considers that as a waste and needs to be treated. So there was a large facility constructed at that treatment plant to treat those sediments prior to discharge. And then the second one was the twinning of the primary line that runs from the plant to the City of St. Thomas and up to the regional booster station. That from there, water goes to the City of St. Thomas, it goes to London, it goes to Aylmer, as well as out into to West Elgin. Those they don't have the ability to impose development charges on that level, so all of that investment is funded through through rates.
Thank you. That's interesting.
Thank you, Wendy.
Go ahead, Jeff M.
Hi, Madam Mayor and councilors. Thank you for taking our questions today. My question, my name is.
Sorry, yeah, just tell us your name and address. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Major. I live at 612 George Street. My question is for Mr. Scandlan. You had a comment about development recovery, that it was not 100% cost recovery, that the development charges were not 100% of the cost, and that the rest of the differential was attributed to other ratepayers. I think you need to clarify that. It's probably what you meant to say was that the remaining costs were spread out amongst all ratepayers on the system and not just regional. So a development in Kokomo, in Port Stanley, for instance, any differential that would be incurred there are also being paid by people in Belmont and other parts of the system.
You're correct. It's any amount that's has to be recovered is spread across, yeah, all users. You're correct.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Fiveash.
Yeah, Doug Fiveash again, 278 Francis Street, Port Stanley. I've heard a bit of discussion about density, population density. I think we have about 3,200 customers on our water system. I don't see the density issue in Port Stanley. Belmont, I know we've expanded a bit, but the density is staying rather the same. How is the density affecting our rates? Are we running water lines down roads and servicing two people? Just wondering if there's a map of what areas are serviced and what areas aren't.
I can just refer to one, and that is certainly the old Lyndhurst area. The lots are very large and they have municipal water, and that's a very low density area. That's just one, but Mr. Perrin, maybe you could respond to that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So with respect to the density comment, that was meant to answer the question why someone from, for example, Kitchener or City of London is paying less money for water than what the people in Central Elgin are. So density absolutely has an effect on that. When you look at, for example, the City of London as a whole, or a larger city, even the City of St. Thomas, there are more densely developed areas. There are subdivisions with shorter lot frontages, so whereby you have more customers in. You have apartments where people are, you could have two apartment blocks or two apartment buildings in the same block, where you could have 250 or 300 customers in those two blocks that are all paying water rates. Whereby you compare that to a local residential street in a suburb, in a subdivision, that same block may only have 25 or 30 customers. That it's the same length of main that's servicing 25 residences versus an apartment building that's potentially 400 residences in that same block. So there's more people paying into the system. So that's how density can affect the operating costs or the capital costs for the system.
Councillor Kravitz.
I just wanted to add to that. There's areas like the Centennial area, there's larger lots there that were on their own septic system. So there is larger areas servicing those areas. We also have a water line. We're partnered with the Port Burwell and the Elmer secondary water systems. So the line that runs from the pumping station towards Port Bruce, we have customers along that route. We also have customers along the Highway 3 corridor feeding the Elmer system. So there is other outreaching areas that we do service as well that are our water customers. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Are there any other?
Yeah, sorry, Madam Mayor.
I was just going to ask if there was anyone else waiting.
I don't see any further hands up.
Thank you. That was, if there are no further questions, everyone has been given a fair opportunity to be heard. If there are no further questions, please be advised that any person wishing to submit further comment on the water wastewater rate review and recommended rates should email Diane Wilson at dwilson@centralalgon.org prior to January 27th at 4 p.m., providing their name and address on their submission. This public meeting is now concluded. An amendment to the bylaw will be considered at a future meeting of council. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Scandlan, for joining us tonight.
Pleasure, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
And Happy New Year.